You are not afraid of failure. You are afraid of losing what you already have. The difference sounds small, but it changes everything about why you stay in situations that are destroying you. Think about why you never say the thing that needs to be said. Why you keep choosing the familiar version of your life over the possible one. It is not cowardice or laziness. It is a force so deeply wired into the human brain that 2 Nobel Prize-winning researchers spent decades studying it, and even they could not fully explain where it ends. In 1979, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky published a paper that quietly rewrote the rules of human behavior. They proved something that sounds obvious once you hear it, but that almost nobody had taken seriously before. Losses feel approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains. Losing $20 hurts about as much as finding $40 feels good. Break up hurts more than finding a partner feels good. The pain of losing something you have is always reliably more powerful than the pleasure of gaining something you do not. They called it loss aversion, and it is running your life in ways you almost certainly have not examined. But here is where this gets interesting. Kahneman and Tversky described what loss aversion does in financial decisions and risk calculations. They did not ask the deeper question. They did not ask what loss aversion does to a soul, what it does to the part of you that is supposed to be growing, choosing, becoming something more than what it already is. George Gurdjieff asked that question, and his answer is far more uncomfortable than anything in the psychology papers. To understand it, we need to start with the science, but we are not going to stop there. The original Kahneman and Tversky study used a simple problem. They asked people to choose between 2 options. Option 1, a guaranteed gain of a certain amount. Option 2, a gamble with a higher expected value but no guarantee. Most people chose the certainty. They preferred the smaller guaranteed gain over the larger possible one. Then they flipped it. Same structure, same numbers, but framed as losses instead of gains. Now people suddenly became willing to gamble. They would rather take the risk of a larger loss than accept a smaller, certain one. The math had not changed, only the framing had. Gains made people cautious, losses made them reckless. This finding was confirmed again in 2020. Researchers tested it across 19 countries and 13 languages. The results held across every culture they studied. Loss aversion is not a Western bias or a product of a particular economic system. It is a feature of being human. The ratio Kahneman and Tversky identified is roughly 2-to-1. A loss of $100 registers with about twice the psychological force of a gain of the same amount. This is why people hold on to failing investments long after they should have sold. The pain of locking in the loss is more powerful than the rational calculation that cutting it would be the right move. The loss aversion overrides the logic, but the research stopped at money and decisions. It stopped at the surface, because the same mechanism that makes people hold on to a failing stock makes them hold on to a failing version of themselves. And that is the territory Gurdjieff was mapping when he talked about something he called identification with one's own suffering. The psychology explains what loss aversion is. Gurdjieff explains what it protects. And what it protects is the single most important thing to understand if you want to know why people do not change. Most people, when they think about loss aversion, think about things: money, status, relationships, safety. But Gurdjieff pointed at something underneath all of those. He said the most powerful loss aversion is not about external things at all. It is about the image of yourself. He called it false personality, the constructed self. This is a version of you that was built from accumulated roles, other people's expectations, and the story you have been telling yourself. This self is not you, but it feels like you. Any threat to that version registers in the nervous system as existential danger. Think about what happens when someone challenges a core belief you hold about yourself. Not a trivial one, a deep one. The reaction is not intellectual disagreement. It is something closer to physical threat. The body tightens. The mind goes defensive. The very thought of being wrong about something central to your self-concept produces something that functions exactly like fear of death. Because to the constructed self, being wrong about its foundation is death. This is loss aversion operating at its deepest level. You are not afraid of losing a belief. You are afraid of losing the self that is built on that belief. And so the machine does what it always does when it detects a potential loss. It doubles down, it defends, it finds reasons the threat is wrong and reasons the current position is right. Not because the defense is accurate, but because the loss is unbearable. Kahneman and Tversky showed that people would make irrational financial decisions to avoid locking in a loss. Gurdjieff showed that people will make irrational life decisions, stay in wrong situations for decades, and avoid every form of genuine growth to avoid the feeling of losing who they think they are. The thing they are protecting is not real. The false personality is a construction. It is made of habits, roles, and images. It has no permanent substance. But loss aversion does not distinguish between real things and imagined ones. It responds to the feeling of potential loss. The feeling of losing a self-image is indistinguishable from the feeling of losing something real. That is the trap. But to see how it actually closes around a person, we need to look at what Gurdjieff called buffers. Gurdjieff described buffers as psychological shock absorbers. They are the mental structures that prevent you from feeling the full contradiction between who you think you are and how you actually behave. Buffers prevent that friction from reaching full force. They operate automatically, below awareness, inserting an explanation before the contradiction can be fully experienced. The lie becomes justified by circumstances. The avoidance becomes reframed as wisdom. The cowardice becomes patience. The buffer absorbs the shock. The contradiction is sealed over. The person continues believing that they must live the life they are currently living. Now put this alongside loss aversion and watch what happens. A person faces something that would require change, an honest conversation, or a departure from a familiar version of their life. The prospect of that change activates loss aversion. The constructed self senses threat. The buffers immediately begin generating reasons why the change is unnecessary, premature, or likely to make things worse. The person experiences these generated reasons as genuine insight. They feel like they are thinking clearly. They are not. They are watching loss aversion and buffers working together to protect the current configuration. Gurdjieff documented in Search of the Miraculous that destroying buffers is one of the most difficult tasks in inner work. In that book, Tversky wrote that a man cannot live without buffers, because without them the contradictions would destroy him psychologically. Here is the spiritual dimension of this. Most people who seek inner development are seeking it while their buffers are still fully intact. They want to grow, they want to change, but they want to do it without losing anything, without the discomfort of seeing the contradictions clearly, without the feeling that the current self is being dismantled. That is not inner development. That is loss aversion disguised as a spiritual path. And there is a moment where that disguise becomes visible if you know what to look for. Every person who has seriously attempted inner work eventually hits the same wall. Everything is going well. The ideas are interesting. The self-observation is producing insights. There is a genuine sense of movement. And then something is asked of them that requires actual loss. Not symbolic loss or the idea of loss. The real thing. The moment where change means that something they have always been, or always had, or always believed, actually has to go. At that moment, loss aversion activates in full force. And because it comes dressed as discernment, as wisdom, as a reasonable assessment of whether this change is really necessary, it is almost impossible to recognize for what it is. The person does not experience it as fear of loss. They experience it as doubt about the path. They question whether the teaching is right. They find legitimate-sounding objections. They decide that perhaps this particular change is not what is being asked. Gurdjieff called this identified resistance. He said most people, when they encounter the moment that would actually move them, retreat into the very personality they came to change. Not because they are weak, because the pull of loss aversion at the level of identity is stronger than any intellectual commitment to growth. Kahneman and Tversky showed that the pain of loss is twice as powerful as the pleasure of equivalent gain. Apply that ratio to the self. The pain of losing even a fragment of a false self-image is experienced as twice as significant as whatever would be gained by releasing it, even when the gain would be freedom, even when the loss is only of something that was never real. The feeling does not care about that distinction. The feeling only knows something familiar is under threat, and the response is automatic, immediate, and disguised as reason. This is why intelligent, sincere, hard-working people can spend years in genuine practice and move very little. The intelligence and sincerity are real, but loss aversion is smarter than intelligence and more durable than sincerity. It will find a way around every commitment that does not account for it directly. Accounting for it directly requires something that almost no one wants to do. What Gurdjieff prescribed was not courage in the conventional sense. He was not asking people to be brave about external risks. He was pointing at something more precise and more demanding. He called it voluntary suffering, the willingness to experience the feeling of loss without immediately running from it, justifying it away, or letting the buffers absorb it before it can be fully seen. This is the practice of staying present at the exact moment the machine wants to flee or avoid change. The moment life asks something that would require your ego to burn, instead of following the loss aversion reflex, you simply stay with what is happening. Feel the pull and observe it without complying with it automatically. Why is this so important? This is important not just because Gurdjieff says so. This is necessary because science also proved this tendency leads to bigger losses. Kahneman and Tversky showed that loss aversion is not rational. It distorts decisions, warps judgment, and produces outcomes that serve the feeling of safety rather than actual well-being. The person who cannot end the relationship that is slowly diminishing them. The person who cannot leave the identity that has stopped fitting. The person who cannot say the honest thing because the conversation that would follow feels too costly. In each case, the calculation is the same. The pain of losing what exists now is experienced as more powerful than whatever could be gained by releasing it. What Gurdjieff added to that picture is that the thing you are protecting is not as solid as it feels. The self-image, the familiar patterns, the constructed personality that loss aversion is defending so fiercely, these are not your essence. They are a layer over it, a layer that has cost you more to maintain than it has ever given back. Our intention of today's lesson is not to motivate you to become fearless. Gurdjieff wants you to see what you are actually afraid of losing, and ask honestly whether it was ever truly yours to keep.